I just recorded somebody going in the other classroom. All right, here we go. How you guys doing? Happy Larry, happy test. Good. That's Larry. You were a little truant on Monday.
I was studying for another test.
Oh, you know, I've gotten that from some other people. Dr. Kimball, sorry, I'm working on something else. Which I take a spring. It makes Dr. Kimball feel very, very sensitive when people are like, oh yeah, I blew your class off for a more important
Sorry,
reason.
it was Dr. Scarborough's test. It went well.
I like your glasses. Thank you. You know what, I was talking with a student earlier today. I don't need glasses, but I really want glasses. I'm telling you. I want to have glasses. Even if I just had like frames with no lenses. But how that work, man? Yeah, you're there to see. Because I would distinguish like it's hilarious. Can I try your glasses on?
I don't know, your head's kind of wide.
It is a little wide. I want to stretch the frames. That'll work.
They work.
I can't see a damn thing.
Yeah, that's good.
Now I can. When I'm getting really serious, I can look at this, right? Grant, really? Is that really what you're telling me? Alright. One can only dream. Right? My other dream is to be like, I told you, like the blue sunglasses wear all the time, like Bono. I want to be that guy who walks around with sunglasses all the time. Daytime, nighttime, nighttime. LeGrand, what are you moaning and groaning about over there? Are you okay?
Yeah.
You want to talk about this work at hand? Alright, let's get into it. So we've been talking about imperialism, yes? And I talked about Jules Ferry's speech with you the other day, remember? Go ahead and open your books to page 302. We're going to be moving at the speed of light today, okay? Get your pen sharpened.
We gotta go support Joel when he turns back.
See what I can do with glasses? Alright? Alright. This joke. So have your pages open to 302. Tell me about what Jules Ferry was saying, this premier of France, about justifications for imperialism. Do you recall? Lucy? Think back to the speech we went over on the steps on Monday. What was he saying about justifications? Hegler?
It's our like responsibility to go over there and fix them,
Okay.
and it'd be good for like national security or whatever.
Yeah, so he talks about like promoting national interest, political power, taking land so other people don't, refueling stations, creating markets. And the big thing that Hegler mentioned at the beginning was this idea of burden, right? It's a duty. We've got to go over there. We have a right over inferior nations, and we have a right because we have a duty. He talks about like we have a mission, right? A civilizing mission. So you got to keep in mind, right? We're talking about colonial rule, the establishment of colonies, like actually going in and conquering territories. And what these European powers will do is that it certainly will talk about doing it in terms that would sort of justify it, if you will, right? In a way that could kind of like justify it. So we're in an age of competition. If somebody else doesn't take it, we will. And again, if you want to take it to the next step, like Ferry does, he's saying, well, we're going to go in there, we're going to bring the benefits of Western civilization to them. So again, if you're putting it in these like positive terms, it helps A, to make you feel better about what you're doing, and B, it kind of justifies it for other people as well. Does that make sense? I'm not saying it's right, okay, by any stretch of the imagination. Well, what I am suggesting is that it's the rhetoric of the period that helps to bring about some sort of stated justification for it, if you will. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, again, I had you read a whole selection of documents about actual establishment of colonial rule in Africa for today, which we'll be talking about in just a few minutes. And if you read those documents, you can understand how this whole idea of a civilizing mission, not only is the language problematic, but it may not actually be what's going on in this setting, okay? So keep that in mind, file away in the back of your brain, preview upcoming attractions, okay? We talked about Rudyard Kipling, right? I mentioned him the other day to you, right? Who came up with this poem, and he wrote it in 1898, or 1899, it's called The White Man's Burden. And it's very much consistent with what also is in Jules Ferry's speech. And by the way, this is intended to be sort of a mockery of that notion. Can you tell me why that is?
Because they're causing a burden that happens.
Oh, yeah, okay, good, right? So the European powers like Kipling representing the British, or Jules Ferry representing the French, they're saying it's a burden to go to these countries in terms of setting up colonial rule, right? It's sort of, we're going there and doing the tough job of colonialism. And this cartoon is saying, it looks a little bit different than that, right? Actually, you're taking over these lands and you're forcing upon the native inhabitants a problematic situation where you're, basically in the form of servitude or laboring on your behalf. So the burden is not yours, the burden is on the people you're colonizing, okay? It's clearly well described. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up this poem, and let's see here, Marty. Can you start reading it for me? I'll tell you when it says stop. Start right there. Can you see it?
I can. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best you breed. Go send your sons to exile to serve your captive need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild. Your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child.
Okay, so think about what Kluge, what Hayat just read, and it's the Marty Molly thing. I'll say the quick parts of the Marty Molly. Okay, so I got it. So think about this as I kind of give you the context for this poem. So the United States had just beaten Spain in what's called the Spanish-American War. Remember, right? The USS Maine, Cuba, the Philippines, all that good stuff, right? And the United States was victorious. The United States was sort of in a predicament. Like, what do we do? Now we've beaten Spain. What do we do with its territory? To the victor usually goes the spoils. And for the Philippines in particular, which Spain had colonized a couple hundred years before, the United States like, do we take over the Philippines? Do we give them independence? Do we do what? Okay. And what ultimately happens is that the United States decides to take over the Philippines. Now, interestingly enough, whenever the United States makes this decision, we'd send in our forces to kind of gain control over the Philippines. The Filipinos actually rebel against this U.S. occupation, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of military presence to enforce American rule in the Philippines at the expense of 30,000 Filipino lives, by the way, and quite a few Americans as well. And so again, when we're talking about this game of imperialism and colonial rule, it doesn't come easy, right? It involves force oftentimes because people tend not to want to be colonized. Whenever the United States was debating in Congress whether or not to take over the Philippines, Rudyard Kipling, who grew up in India, he's British, right? The British have controlled India at this point in time since 1858, so he's born into British-controlled India, and he'll live there most of his life. Rudyard Kipling will. You know Rudyard Kipling, yes? The Jungle Book. Yeah. Okay. He wrote a great novel that I use in my History of India class. It's called Kim. It's about this Irish youth named Kimball O'Hara, who grows up in the northern part of India, in the province of the Punjab, and gets involved in sort of this game of imperialism. So Kipling writes a lot of really interesting stuff, not only on India, but on the British Empire. And he writes this poem called The White Man's Burden in response to this debate going on in the U.S. Congress about what to do with the Philippines, okay? Now again, Marty just read the first selection from it. It's titled The White Man's Burden. So why does Kipling say it's burden? And again, this is an interesting part of the class because we deal with all these sort of racial problematics, right? In the language and in kind of how people are presented and perceived. And it's a really interesting time. It's not that long ago, right? We're talking like 120 years ago, 110 years ago, 100 years ago in some cases, where there's all these problematic and strange conversations and discussions and debates, historically speaking, about different countries and their relationship with other countries. Race comes into it. And again, think Jules Ferry, think Rudyard Kipling. Okay, very problematic but interesting too. So, what did you get from this first section that Marty read? What's Kipling's argument? Why is he saying it's a white man's burden to colonize? What's burdensome about it?
You're sending your loved ones. to-
Okay. So we're sending our sons off to serve, right, in exile to these foreign lands. So that's a tough thing to do. Remember I mentioned 4 feathers of this class? I mentioned this class, 4 feathers of this class? Yeah. Where these guys are going off to the Sudan to fight and like, we're sending our sons off like to these foreign lands to fight and die. Okay. What else? The best, your best young men. Are you sending them off? What else?
The people they have to deal with.
The people have to deal with, right? So he said, think about it. When he's talking about the captives, he's saying you're serving them. When you tend to think about it in colonialism and conquest, you don't think about like it's a role of servitude, but Rudyard Kipling kind of flips the whole idea on its head and says, this is not like a glorious thing we're talking about. This is hard work, and we're going into these countries, these colonies that we're colonizing, and we're serving the people, right? And the people that we're serving, how does he describe them? half devil and half child. Again, we'll get into these sort of racially problematic depictions and descriptions, but from a Western European perspective at this point in time, you could see kind of this notion of racial superiority because they're referring to the native populations, whether it's of Africa or the Pacific or the Philippines, you name it, as half devil and half child. What's implied in those two sentiments?
Evil and naive.
Evil and naive, right? So evil, why? Because they don't have what? Christianity, right? So again, part of the imperial experience is missionaries going to these lands as well and bringing Christianity. And so part of the justification is like, oh, these people don't have the illuminating light of the Gospels. We need to bring it to them. It's part of our civilizing mission. They're like half devil. The London Missionary Society, if you saw their, I wonder if I can pull it up. It would be cool if I could. You would be intrigued by this, okay? Hold on a second. Because again, it helps you understand the context. Let's see. London Missionary Society. Let's see if I can find images. It would be so great. Oh my goodness. No. Hold on. Let me do something else. London Missionary Society logo. We call it a logo. Maybe I can describe it to you, right? You know what? I'll do a better job in describing it than if I showed you the pictures. Not really, but it's the best I can do. All right, so imagine like the pamphlets of the London Missionary Society where on it, it shows like the cross, and it shows like light shining out from the cross, and then it shows kind of stereotypical pictures of native peoples of like, say, the Arabian Peninsula. So someone dressed in like traditional Arab garb, and they're like down on their knees going, and then it shows like Africans in chains, like with the chains like being like reaching up, like half naked, like breaking chains, like and it shows all these different native peoples who are being positively impacted by, you know, again by the work of the London Missionary Society. And so again, when we're talking about this civilizing mission, so to speak, it ties into religion as well, where because these people don't have Christianity, they're considered to be necessarily backwards, not necessarily evil, but not, you know, not the equivalent of a Christian. And so this helps to kind of justify as well. And again, half devil, half child would imply that they're uneducated, they're unsophisticated, they're uncivilized. And so again, we're bringing them these things, right? Education, civilization, Christianity. How do you sleep at night when you're doing something like colonialism and conquest of foreign lands? Couch it in terms of, we're doing this for them, we're doing it to better them, we're doing it on their behalf. It's hard on us, it's to their betterment, and so it's an interesting kind of presentation, if you will, in representation. All right, so let's keep going. Grant was out on the high seas catching a marlin. He was thinking about it. Like, oh yeah, like Santiago, right? Okay, forget it. Old man of the sea. All right, forget it. Start right here.
Take up the white man's burden and patience to abide. Veil the thread of terror and check the show of pride. Thy open speech and simple, and 100 times made plain. To seek another's profit and work another's gain.
All right, forget all that up here. It's consistent with what we talked about before. But again, when Kipling's describing what's going on with establishing colonial rule, he's saying, look, again, this is not glorious work. This is labor, right? You're working for another's profit. You're working for someone else's gain, for their benefit. It's hard on the people who are doing it. And again, it's just one of those interesting examples of where, in this case, Kipling is trying to say, like, you know, people you should feel sorry for are not the people being colonized, but the colonizers for the hard work they're having to do, okay? It's what I think you've heard the expression, right? It's a tough job and somebody has to do it. This is what Kipling's saying, okay? All right, so start right here. Lauren Moore.
Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward, the blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of hosts ye humor, slowly to the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night?
All right, so this is a great section because of what it contains. And so what makes this process of establishing colonial rule, this civilizing mission, so to speak, what makes it even more burdensome than has already been described, according to this section? Malachi. What makes it even more burdensome?
You got people criticizing what you're doing, and the natives don't like you.
Exactly, right? You're sort of begrudged for what you're doing, right? They don't appreciate. You say, it makes it even harder because nobody appreciates it. They don't recognize what we're doing. Okay, you're being judged constantly. You're receiving blame and hatred. And again, the people you're trying to liberate from their darkness are happy in their ignorance, happy in their backwardness, happy in their in their current state. So again, it's burdensome, right? Because people don't appreciate it, don't recognize what you're doing for them, according to Kipling. All right. And then let's see. Hogan, read this last one. Take us to the promised land. This one doesn't have much in it, but we'll finish with it.
Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly preferred laurel, the easy, ungrudged praise.
Okay, hold that for a second. It's like, you know what? The kids play is like done, right? This is like serious business, right? So forget about like the easygoing life. This is hard stuff.
Come now to search your manhood through all the thankless years, cold-edged with dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers.
All right. So in the end, when you've maybe served in the colonial setting, you've been maybe a British civil servant in the empire somewhere. Now you're back home in London, where again in London, people are. I mean, they're not in the colonies. They see it differently. Back home, not only do people not understand what you're doing, but they're also very critical of it. And so, again, when it's all said and done, you've done all this, you've worked in the empire, you come back home and you're still being criticized and you're being judged for what you've done. Nobody understands it. Nobody can appreciate the burden with which you've been saddled for X period of your life, right? So this is Kipling, and what makes this interesting is he's quite sincere about this, right? He's quite sincere about it. And this is, again, part of this greater conversation that's going on late 19th, early 20th century about this game of colonialism. Because this is the high tide. Late 19th century is when all the remaining land in the world is being grabbed up, it's being snatched up. And so it's just this real scramble, if you will. And in the context of the scramble, debates like in the French Assembly are being held, debates in Congress are being held about what to do. Commentators, cultural commentators like Rudyard Kipling are offering up their perspectives on it. And again, I'm not going to suggest to you that this is necessarily the dominant perspective or the universal perspective, but it is a perspective of some, okay? And we've talked about social Darwinism. This is a period where people are making these very blanket statements about race. Right? There are superior cultures, there are inferior cultures. Superior cultures have the right, in the spirit of competition, to dominate inferior cultures. And again, this is not that long ago, but this is the context in which imperialism, this game of colonial rule, unfolds in a very kind of dramatic fashion. Okay, any questions so far? You guys are doing great. Everybody seems plugged in. Everybody seems ready to roll. Okay. Dr. Campbell's keeping the pace going. Okay, I'm going to try to roll. Keep the pace going today. All right. So we're talking about Kipling. Go ahead and open your books to page 303 or 302. We'll talk a little bit more about these images in here, okay? Let me back up my slide. Actually, I'm going to find a better map for you first. What do y'all see in that first image there on page 302? What's depicted there? This is my good map. I like this map.
What kind of bird is that?
Well, again, we'll come to the bird in a second. If you flip it this way, it's an eagle. And we'll flip this. Okay, so everybody got this? Let's look at the one on the left. Okay. So we've got this image in Punch magazine, which is published in Great Britain, called Partners. And it's about, again, kind of colonial competition, if you will. You have the main dancer in the front, Britannia. Okay, Britannia. Who do you think Britannia represents? Britain, and more specifically, Great Britain proper, or Great Britain in a largesse sense. Like the whole empire, right? Britannia. Like, the British Empire. Remember, the sun never sets in the British Empire. 20% of the Earth's surface. And so Great Britain obviously is like the dominant player. Okay? Who's Great Britain dancing with? Colonia, okay? So they're mixing it up, right? They're doing a little waltz. What does Britannia say to Colonia as they're whispering sweet nothings in each other's ears?
After all my dear, we need trouble ourselves about.
And Colonia says in response?
No, we can always dance together, you and I.
Okay, so excellent. So what is the message of this cartoon then about the British Empire and its colonies?
We're working together.
Working together, yeah, it's mutually sort of beneficial, right? So mutual attraction. And again, it's not the idea of like strong armed conquest and exploitation of resources. This idea of like, you know what, this is good for you, it's good for me, mutually beneficial. And again, if you're positioning what you're doing in these terms or positing what you're doing in these terms, it makes it more of an attractive enterprise, if you will. Yes? Okay. What about the people waiting in the wings? Who do they represent? What countries do they represent? Who's the guy leaning up, like twisting his mustache? Who's that? Who's up? Germany. German Kaiser, right? So if anybody see the eagle on the helmet, Kaiser. Okay. So like German Kaiser. Okay. And he's going, right? Because remember, Germany. When did they become a country? Just a little while before this was published, right? 1871. Guess what? Germany had a lot of catching up to do. And Germany's like, I need some land, damn it! Okay? The Kaiser was. Because what makes countries strong, late 19th century? Colonies. An empire. Germany will take over land in Papua New Guinea. Do you know there are parts of Papua New Guinea? I mean, we're talking about the heart of remote South Pacific, right? PNG, or what's referred to as Papua New Guinea, which is near Vanuatu, which is where I spent time. Places in Papua New Guinea where deep in the heart, because all the mountains of Papua New Guinea are like on the coastline. You go to the heart of Papua New Guinea, there are tribal peoples there who've never seen a European. They have no contact whatsoever with modern technology. They may have seen an airplane fly over, but that's about the extent of it, right? And like, what the hell is that? Okay. When the missus came and visited me in Vanuatu, she was the girlfriend. When she left Vanuatu, she was the missus because we eloped, much to her Portuguese Catholic mother-in-law's chagrin. But you know what? I was on island time, and island time was dictated. Elopement sounded good. Okay. So I was like island boy back then. Okay. Now back then, that was island boy like that. And the idea of like a church wedding with lots of people and lots of gifts and material things, it didn't really speak to your spirit. Okay. That's another story. But okay, I'm wasting time. But we went to this little island of Futuna. And again, there's still remote parts of the world. And when it's this big mesa that comes up out of the sea. You land on this like little strip. It's like in a twin-hour plane. It's not a very long runway. If the pilot is not very adept, right? They only use the most adept pilots in the Air Vanuatu fleet because you have to like touch down, like put the brakes on really quickly, or you can go sail off a cliff into the drink. Okay, so it's a very short runway, just because this whole island just comes up out of the sea, and then the whole island is connected with like little footpaths. Now this is not too. I've been in Vanuatu for a few months. This is one of my wife. I'm like, hey, now you're here. We're gonna go like a southern tour of some of the islands in the south. I'm like, get ready, so we have backpacks. My poor girlfriend at the time, wife now. My poor wife. Literally, we're walking down these footpaths, and you're walking, and you come to a wall, right? And so then you have like a bamboo ladder. Like a ladder made out of bamboo, you climb up the ladder, and then you're like on a ledge, and you're like shimmying along, right? And then you get to like a little part where it's like, like handholds and footholds, like you're going along, and then you come to another ladder and you go down, and it's another footpath. But the whole thing's like this big rock that comes up out of the sea. It's kind of an island called Futuna. We're going along through Futuna. We got to the other side of the island. The chief's son was walking with us, by the way. He had a machete. Okay. Came to one little village. All the school children came running down the hill. I was like, what's going on there? My wife doesn't like when people stare at her. Guess what? 30 kids staring at her. They'd never seen white people before. That's how remote it was. And when my wife would feel like this with her hair, because she was hot, they're like, wow. That's amazing, right? And my wife was like, these people are staring at me. I'm like, just go with it, it's fine. She's like, I don't like when people stare at me. Just go with it, it's fine. So anyway, we survived, okay. That was the day I did fall, because I didn't want to give up my sugar cane. We were getting ready to go down like a cliff face. And I had sugar cane because it was hot, it was damn hot. Sugar cane raw, there's a lot of water in it, right? So I'm like chewing my sugar cane. My wife's like, we're getting ready to go down the cliff, front face. Like, what about your sugar cane? Like, don't worry, I got this. Don't worry, good, right? I got 3 points of contact. I'm great. Okay, guess what? Not so great. I'm like shimmying down the cliff, and all of a sudden I lost my footing, and I fell like 30 feet, like shoom! Like, it didn't like fall, like boom, it was like on a slope. And so and my arms got like pinned back. I was like shredded. My arms were like shredded, cut, sliced. I was all bruised up and sliced. I'm still holding my sugar cane in the end. She's like, "You okay?" Yeah, I think I'm okay. Bleeding. Sugar cane, good idea. Like, crunch. Alright, forget it. Alright, anyway. So Germany, like, which is Papua New Guinea, which is near Vanuatu. Germany comes over and takes like part of Papua New Guinea. They take part of Samoa. Germany's getting any damn bit of land they can get, okay? Because they're so late in the game. That's why they're waiting back in the wings like, okay, we want to dance. We want somebody to dance with, damn it, okay? We'll go to PNG to find somebody to dance with. And in the very background, who these two countries represent? France is the woman, and Russia is the czar, right? Okay. And again, they're like, we want to get into the game too, right? They're kind of, and by the way, at this point in time, the French and the Russians are starting to kind of work together. So this is kind of like European politics. Okay. Now, remember what I told you? According to the British, they wanted to establish a colony in Africa from where to where? Cairo to where? Where that? Establish in Africa a swath of colonies from Cairo to the Cape. Cairo to the Cape. And if you look at that, look who messes it up. If you look at that last image, I'll tell you the story of this, and this is where it gets really interesting, okay? 1885, this thing called the Berlin Conference is held. 1884, okay? All these European powers, Great Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Spain, even Belgium, if you can believe Belgium? What? Yes, Belgium, okay. They meet in Berlin to talk about the colonization of Africa. Africa historically, because of the inability to get up the rivers before steamships, because of things like malaria, Europeans had settled in parts of Africa before. Like Algeria, the French, 1830. But not all of Algeria, just like here. You got it? You had different locations in this region here that the Portuguese and the Spanish had set up way back in like the late 1400s, early 1500s, exclusively as ports for the transatlantic slave trade, okay? And so they were not talking like a big swath of territory, but they controlled these coastlines, and this is where the slaves would be brought in from the interior, and then you'd have, again, the Atlantic crossing, okay? So again, the coastline on the east had been, or on the west, had seen European settlement, okay? But again, the heart of Africa, no. The Dutch came to the tip of South Africa, right? 1700s. Eventually, the British said, "Hey, South Africa is nice," okay? And so the British started moving in the 1800s, and by the late 1800s, basically, the Dutch. I don't know if you know the story, but the Dutch, or what they call the voortrekkers, right? They pushed into the interior. The British basically controlled the coastline. But by 1885, you got the Dutch and the British here. You've got Portuguese and Spanish in different regions here. You got the French up there in Algeria, but most of Africa, and again, Africa is huge compared to most other parts of the world, totally untapped, unexplored, undeveloped, no European presence whatsoever. But remember, in this mad game of imperialism that takes place late 19th century, you see all this land with all of its resources. I mean, keep this in mind, right? Africa is super rich in resources. And what do Europeans want to do with those resources? Think Jules Verne. Want to get access to. What resources can you get out of Africa, by the way? What kind of things? Gold, yeah, for sure. Rubber, we'll be talking about shortly. Coal, yeah, but what if you sit on coal for a few more eons? Diamonds, right? Like in South Africa, okay. What else? Ivory. Not to mention all the agricultural potential, because Africa, it's below the equator, it's very warm climate, and so again, you got great agricultural opportunities. So when we think about Africa, think rich in resources, think object of desire for Europeans in terms of wanting to control. 1885, all these European powers sit down in Berlin at a table and they start wheeling and dealing and doling out. It's like Britain's like, I claim this. French are like, well, we're sort of like the second power in Europe. We claim this, and on and on and on and on and on. And so the historic powers like Great Britain and France, you can see they get the lion's share of the land in Africa, right? So Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain. Everything over here, like this dark brown color, is French, right? The French will colonize this land, create their own sort of independent, separate colonies, okay? French West Africa, French Equatorial Africa, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, you name it, okay? If you look at the Portuguese, they get in the game, Mozambique, Angola. You get the Italians in Eritrea, Somaliland. The Spanish don't do very well. They get the Gold Coast or the Gold River there, the Rio de Oro, and Spanish Morocco. French get Madagascar. Let's talk about the Germans. Cameroon, Southwest Africa. Oh my goodness. Part of this Berlin Conference stipulated that you can claim this land as your own. It becomes officially your own as a European power if you can achieve what's called effective occupation. Meaning, within an X period of time, you have to set up a colonial government. Now you claim it. To fulfill that claim, you have to set up a government, a colonial government. Great Britain has a lot of land they've claimed at the Berlin Conference. They're late in getting into German East Africa. The Germans sort of wait out the period of time. The British don't get in there, so the Germans come sneaking in like, put a flag down, set up a colonial government, say, it's ours, baby. And that's what this image is lamenting in, that's published in 1894 on the swoop, okay? It's dealing with this land that we now, that at this point we call German East Africa, because this eagle's representing the German Empire swooping in at the last minute to basically take from the British their claim of this land, okay? Questions so far? Pigla?
What's wrong with Ethiopia?
Great question. All right. So there are two areas in Africa, and to answer people's questions, let me take a little step back for a moment. Keep in mind the implications of this. There are no African monarchs, chiefs, you name it, in Berlin. These are all Europeans sitting around saying, we're going to take over Africa, right? We're going to colonize it, and we're going to go and settle. And basically, a lot of these occupations come with sometimes treaties, but sometimes like forced occupation, okay? Like coming in there, conquering these lands. And so again, if you put it in perspective, Africa has already been ravaged historically by Europeans due to what? The beginning of the 1400s. The slave trade, right? Which was basically as a way to work the agriculture in the New World. So, Africa is still trying to recover from this 300-400 years of the African slave trade. And then late 19th century, you see Africa being colonized. So human resources exploited at first. Now both human and, basically you could say land and mineral resources being exploited late 19th century. So again, Africa has this long, interesting history of exploitation by Western powers. Okay. Italy had claimed Ethiopia. Ethiopia, late 19th century, had two very savvy monarchs who ruled successively. One was named Menelik, the other one named Theodros Theodore. Okay, Theodros or Theodore. And by the way, I love Ethiopian history. I want to go. I've never been. The guy I studied Middle Eastern history in grad school. It's actually Dr. Daniel's cousin, weirdly enough. Okay, but this guy's name's Peter Gerritsen. He's since retired, but he grew up in Ethiopia, and his dad was an advisor to the Ethiopian king Haile Selassie. And so he grew up like in Haile Selassie's court, playing with Haile Selassie's children. So like when I first met him, I got to know him. He's like, oh yeah, I used to live in Ethiopia. Oh, what'd you do? Oh yeah, we lived at Haile Selassie's court. I'm like, you lived in Haile Selassie's freaking court, man? Are you serious? Okay. You grew up playing with his kids, like you went to dinner. By the way, Haile Selassie is significant, not just as a monarch, but in the Caribbean, people came to recognize him as being more than a political figure. Do you know what I'm talking about? When I say Haile Selassie. His reign title was, his real name is Haile Selassie. His reign title was Rastafari. So the Rastafarian religion in places like Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean grows up around this figure named Haile Selassie, because when he comes to power in 1930, the Italians quickly kind of take over. We'll come back to the other Italian story in just a moment. He, with the help of the British in 1937, they drive out the Italians, and so he's the first, he's considered to be like one of the first African monarchs to sort of reclaim his country's future and sort of land and basically destiny And so, again, late 1930s, Haile Selassie, otherwise known as Rastafari, was able to achieve, this overthrow of the Italians. And then people in the Caribbean, also ruled by white Europeans, like in Jamaica, they see him as a hope for black people everywhere, right? And see him not just in political terms, but seeing him in like religious terms as like this new Messiah. And so people, not all people in Jamaica, but those who call themselves Rastafarians, come to worship Haile Selassie as this living Messiah who again is the hope for people of color, black people everywhere, because of what he was able to achieve. It's a fascinating story, okay? The Rastafari religion is fascinating, okay? Really interesting. Okay, but anyway, when the Italians came earlier, right, under the reigns of Teodros and Menelik, these two emperors had bought a lot of guns over the years. And they had a big army. They knew what was coming, right? They knew European colonialism was coming. The Italians land to invade, and both Teodros and Menelik in two different battles over the course of like a 10-year period of time. Time and time again, they beat back the Italian forces who had invaded, shocking many Europeans because like, how could an African army, an inferior African army beat a European one? And again, that's sort of like the rhetoric of the day. But circa 1914, this is the reason that Ethiopia is independent compared to all these other countries, because they have defended themselves against Italian occupation. Again, the Italians come back later on, 1930s, for a few short years before Haile Selassie drives them out. All right, there's one other country, by the way, if you're watching, if you're paying attention. You see it? It's independent, 1914? Liberia. What do you know about Liberia? Fascinating. This is an American story. Okay. So let me show you. What do you have, Keegler? Is it?
Nothing.
Keegler, help me. Come on, help me. Don't leave me in suspense.
I got nothing.
You got nothing? All right. All right. Look at this flag of Liberia. Does it look familiar? So 1834, President Monroe, U.S. President Monroe, creates the country of Liberia, buys land in Africa. The United States government does, buys land in Africa. It's a place for manumitted or freed slaves, American slaves, if they want to, right? If they want to go back to Mother Africa, they can, and they have a state, right? It's a state that's designated for freed African slaves, or I should say African slaves in the United States, okay? And it actually happens, right? Actually, shipload upon shipload of former slaves from the United States go back to Africa, facilitated by the United States government, established under the reign of the administration of President Monroe. And again, it's this independent African state for former slaves to live in. Okay, capital of Liberia. For you geography nerds, yep, Monrovia. President Monroe. All right, so interesting, yes. Now, so again, whenever this game of imperialism is starting to work itself out, 1885, and this scramble for Africa is set to begin, you damn well better believe that nobody's messing with Liberia, because it's got Big Brother United States looking over it, okay? And so they're like, we're not messing with Liberia, okay? Try to mess with Ethiopia. Ethiopians drove us out, but Liberia, off limits, United States. Basically, it's their jurisdiction, okay, for former slaves. So the rest of Africa, though, if you look, colonized. Okay, colonized. Some of this begins in the 1860s. Again, it's not all forced occupation. Some of it, a lot of it is. Look with me, join me on page 306. Starting 306 all the way to 309. This is these things. Remember I said you know yesterday? I'm sitting on my couch, drinking a nice cup of coffee, a nice cup of Joe. It's a nice afternoon cup of Joe. It really hits the spot. Okay? And in so doing, that's like, I guess somebody's, encourage them to read. Hopefully you did. Right, Click, you did. Yes, okay. I'm going to suggest to you that document number 1, the Lagos Treaty of Cession. Document number 2, the treaty between the International Association of Congo and these respective African chiefs. And then the agreement between Charles Rudd and the Lobengula King of Matabele land all have some sort of common associations. Again, these are written in 1861, mid-1880s, and then 1891. What do you find interesting about these particular documents? These treaties, Baker.
I was thinking out loud.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they all have some, there's a French expression called le jet de main. You know what it means? Sleight of hand. Right? It's like a magician's trick, right? I mean, you know, we've seen some good magicians, but man, how do they do that? It's all like a sleight of hand. Right? I wish I could do it. I don't have any skills there. Okay. All these treaties present kind of like the positives. Like, this is what you will get. Seeming positives. But embedded in these as well are potential negatives. So help me understand in terms of like, why would chiefs sign these treaties in terms of what they perceive they're going to be getting out of it? Smith.
They thought they were gonna, get people to help them with the Johns and Hassett and
Yeah.
around their area.
Right, and again, look at this very first one, written in 1861. Read it, Smith, the first part, under Article 1.
In order that the Queen of England may be the better enabled to assist, defend, and protect the inhabitants of Lagos, and put an end to the slave trade in this and the neighboring countries, and to prevent the destructive war so frequently undertaken. For the capture of slaves, I,
Docemo.
do give, transfer, and by these presents grant and confirm unto the Queen of Great Britain, her heirs and successors forever, the port and island of Lagos, and with all rights, profits, territories, and
Appurtenances.
appurtenances, incidental rights, whatsoever thereunto belonging, freely, fully, entirely, and absolutely the inhabitants of the said island and territories as the Queen's subjects and under her sovereignty, crown, jurisdiction, and government being still suffered to live there.
Okay. So, again, the question I have for you is this African chief, Docemo, what's he getting at? Yeah, so protections, right? Protections, helping to combat the slave trade in that country and the neighboring countries. So there's obviously problems that need to be dealt with, and so Great Britain is pledging those type of protections and promotion of rights, opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, in granting such protections and privileges, if you will, what is Lagos giving up? Everything, right? Their whole sovereign rule, okay? Now keep in mind, one thing that we mentioned is that in a lot of societies historically, and actually I'll say probably the most, like we live in the Western world, right? In the Western world that's basically dominated by the ideas of Adam Smith, right? Which is private property, capitalism, ownership of land, right? I mean, it predates Adam Smith, but again, we tend to think about the possession of things. Guess what? In the South Pacific, in the Americas, in Africa, historically, the native populations, they don't see land as something to be owned, right? They see it as something to live on, live sort of in concert with, but the whole idea of ownership of land that we have in the Western world is a foreign concept to most people around the world, historically speaking, right? Land is sacred. You can't possess the land. When you think about Native American tribes, whenever ranchers started putting up like barbed wire in the 19th century in the United States, like you can't like tie up the land with this barbed wire. Like, what are you doing? Like cordoning off pieces of land. This is, the cattle are supposed to, the buffalo roam freely, and and the land is sort of sacred and shared, if you will. And so again, when we're talking about what's going on in Africa, late 19th century, there's no concept of land ownership. And so in a lot of the cases, as your introduction mentioned, right, when you're having these treaties read to you or translated for you, in probably not the most precise terms, the concept of land ownership and ceding of land to these Western powers is not really understood or comprehended because it's so far beyond the scope of the imagination, if that makes sense, okay? And so again, you're seeing a lot of these African chieftains and kings losing their land and the rights to their land, really with a stroke of a pen, that they don't necessarily even have any idea is happening because it's not even something they could even anticipate.
Where is this? Is this Nigeria?
The Lagos near there, yeah, near. Okay, so look at Article 1 on page 307. Matthew Larry, can you read Article 1? This is, and by the way, we're going to be talking a lot today about the International Trade Association of the Commonwealth. And here we see.
The chiefs in Gobi Gambi and Mafela, recognize that it is highly desirable that the International Association of the Congo should, for the advancement of civilization and trade, be firmly established in their country. They therefore now, for themselves and their heirs and successors forever, do give up to the said association the sovereignty and all sovereign and governing rights to all their territories.
Okay, so again, in terms of the trade-off, we're going to be here to promote civilization and trade, this International Association of Congo, but in the process of so doing, you are ceding all of your territory to us. And again, this is not written up by these particular chiefs. This is being presented to them and saying, okay, this is what you agreed to, you sign off on it, right? Now again, what's great about the next two documents that deal with Matabele land, which is down sort of like South Africa region, okay, is we see the original treaty and then we see a response to that treaty once this particular leader by the name of Lobengula realizes what the hell's going on, okay? So in the original treaty, what basically is stated? So think about this. Charles Rudd basically is going to pay 100 pounds sterling British currency on the first day of every lunar month, 1,000 rifles, 100,000 rounds of cartridges, 500 rifles, 50,000 of said cartridges be ordered, et cetera, on and on, with it, deliver on the Zambezi River steamboat with guns, et cetera, et cetera. So these are going to be delivered. And then I, Lobengula, king of Matabele land, Mashona land, and certain adjoining territories, do hereby grant and assign what? The complete and exclusive charge over all metals and minerals situated and contained in my kingdoms. Principalities and dominions together with full power to do all things that they may deem necessary to win and procure the same, and to hold, collect, and enjoy the profits of revenue, if any derivable from the said metals and minerals. Okay? So, what effect do we see in this document? The loss of what?
The most valuable thing we have.
I mean, exactly. I mean, think about it. There's a lot in South Africa, this part of South Africa, there's a lot of mineral wealth. And you're seeing with effectively what's really kind of a pittance, a few rifles, some cartridges and things like that, a steamboat, they're giving up this most valuable resource, which is this mineral wealth, right? And again, we recognize there's some sleight of hand going on here, because later, this particular king said, he writes a letter to Queen Victoria, and in writing it, Springer, can you read it? What does he say? Starboat says some time ago. And again, so that he's responding to actually, once he realizes what actually has gone down page 309.
Where?
Letter of King Lobengula to Queen Victoria, 309.
Some time ago, a party of men came to my country. The principal one appearing to be a man called Rudd. They asked me for a place to dig gold and said they would give me certain things for the right to do so. I told them to bring what they could give, and I would show them what I would do. A document was written and presented to me for signature. I asked what it contained and was told that in it were my words and the words of those men. I put my hand on it. About 3 months afterwards, I heard from other sources that I had given by that document the right to all the minerals of my country. I called a meeting of my Indians and also of the white men and demanded a copy of the document. It was proved to me that I had signed away the mineral rights of my whole country to Rudd and his friends. I have since had a meeting of my Indians, and they will not recognize the paper, as it contains neither my word nor the words of those who got it. I write to you that you may know the truth about this thing.
Okay, so what do we learn from King Lobengula about his perspective on what he basically signed off on? What's that? Yeah, basically, he didn't realize these are, I had no idea that that's what I was signing to, right? Because remember, look at his document, he just marked next to it. And so this is this interesting phenomenon between 1860 and the early 1890s. As part of this colonial occupation of Africa, where in a lot of these cases, these treaties are signed, and the people are signing them don't know what they're signing away, right? And here you go. Okay, you know what? And think about that. Think about what we talked about on Monday, right? You know, with the Englishman in the ABC for Maybe Patriots saying, "W's the word of the Englishman true when given means what he says he'll do." All you do is like, "Oh, yeah, document, right? No, this is it. You sign this document, so you don't have no recourse for anything other than agreeing to what's in this document that you put your signature to, maybe in X in some cases." And so, indeed, we're seeing really kind of a pulling of the wool over the eyes, if you will, in these cases. And these, again, are the treaties. We have to recognize that also this effective occupation is carried out militarily in a lot of other places where, there's a refusal to sign any sort of documents, and then they say, okay, well, if you won't allow us to colonize, then we'll come in and conquer. Okay, the most interesting story from this period happens here, Belgian Congo, which we've read a little bit about already. Okay, let's read a little bit more. So this guy, King Leopold, this book you need to read. I'm telling you, this book is amazing. Okay, disturbing, but amazing. It's called King Leopold's Ghost. Okay, so King of Belgium, Leopold II. Belgium is a non-entity, right? They are a nobody power in the late 19th century. There's a recognition that to become a somebody, you have to have land, and the most difficult territory to gain sort of control of, right, is this. It's the very heart of Africa. And whenever they're coming up with this Berlin Conference, King Leopold comes up with this plan with his advisors that this would be great, if Belgium could somehow get control of it. Recognizing that they're a minor player, it's really hard to say, well, we need this big swath of territory, which is a huge chunk of Africa, even though we're just this tiny, like, third-rate power, Belgium, okay? But we have chocolates and waffles, but we want colonies, okay? And so the scheme is hatched. And again, everything I'm describing seems totally made up, perhaps, but it is really a scheme. He creates this thing called the International Association of the Congo. He says, listen, this will be a place that, lots of Western powers can benefit from, right? We'll allow sort of like free trade in here, okay? And we'll come in here and develop this land. We'll sort of take the burden upon ourselves to be sort of the purveyors of all this, right? The facilitators, okay? So again, not really colonization, but an international association that me as the King of Belgium kind of take it upon myself to manage on the behalf of everybody. And by the way, if you read this document today, what is being promised by King Leopold II about what's going to go on in the Belgian Congo? What is he promised? No, well, it's in the letter. It's in the letter, but because we hear in the letter best practice some of the things that are promised. But we'll get the letter in just a minute. But what King Leopold II says, what we're going to do here, in addition to kind of promoting trade and opportunities, is we're really going to go in here from a humanitarian perspective, right? This is like part of Africa that have been ravaged by the slave trade. We will go into the Belgian Congo and we're going to do all this humanitarian aid work. Okay, that's what King Leopold II. That's the goal of the International Association of the Congo. Inspired by this was this African-American figure, one of the most famous ones in the late 19th century. If you're not familiar with him, he's interesting, really interesting. It's this guy named George Washington Williams, who hears about this, that's what King Leopold II is doing, humanitarian aid, development of the Congo for the betterment of the population there. And he develops this sort of relationship back and forth with King Leopold II, and he keeps saying, hey, I would really love to go to your Congo that you're doing all this great work in, to kind of see, right? And maybe it's a model for other nations to follow. He's really interested in going to check out what's going on the ground in the Belgian Congo. What does his pen pal, King Leopold II, keep telling him? Don't go. Like, you don't need to go, nothing for you to see there, don't worry about it, you don't want to go there, it's terrible, right? You don't want to go. Okay, it's hot, okay? So he keeps saying, I want to go, and Leopold II says, I don't think so. And so anyway, George Washington Williams goes anyway, spends several months in the Congo traveling around, and when he gets back from the Congo, he writes a letter to his pen pal, and he addresses it to his good and great friend, by the way, right, Leopold II, King of Belgium, the facilitator of this International Association of the Congo. And in writing this letter, what does George Washington Williams reveal? That's my question. What is it? Complete facade. Right? A complete charade, if you will. Okay? Because he says, look, when I arrived in the Congo, I naturally sought for the results. This is the first full paragraph. Of the brilliant program, fostering care, benevolent enterprise, and honest and practical effort to increase the knowledge of the natives and secure their welfare, all of which have been promised by King Leopold II in establishing this, right? And he says, I had never been able to conceive of Europeans establishing a government in a tropical country without building a hospital, and yet from the mouth of the Congo River to its headwaters here to the Seventh Cataract, a distance of some 1,500 miles, there's not a solitary hospital for Europeans. and only 3 sheds for sick Africans in the service of the state, not fit to be occupied by a horse. There's not a single chaplain in the employ of your Majesty's government who's told the sick or barely dead. And he goes on and on and on and on. And the next paragraph is where it gets really interesting. Tabir, can you read where it says instead of natives of the Congo?
Instead of the natives of the Congo adopting the foster care of your Majesty's government, they everywhere complain that their land has been taken from them by force. Though the government is cruel and arbitrary and declare that they neither love nor respect the government and its flag. Your Majesty's government has sequestered their land, burned their towns, stolen their property, enslaved their women and children, and committed other crimes too numerous to mention in detail.
Okay. So again, according to George Washington Williams, in terms of what he's seeing, the Belgian administration of the Congo involves what? Cruelty, rape, burning of towns, exploitation, ill treatment, on and on. And by the way, this is the reason, this letter, and once George Washington Williams kind of figured out what was going on in the Congo, this is actually what led Joseph Conrad, the author of The Heart of Darkness, to go to the Congo himself and see what was going on. And that's why he wrote that novel. And again, there's a terrible scene in there where I'm trying to think how he describes it. It's called he describes the place as like the dying place. And what it is these chain gangs of native Africans in the Congo that this guy Marlowe in this novel, that's based upon something that actually Joseph Conrad had seen, where they're so overworked in what is basically slave labor, again, tied up with chains, that once they've done with their shift, they go off into the shade where they actually go lay down to die because they've been so overworked. And again, we're talking about the 1890s, early 1900s, effectively slavery in existence in the Congo, that people like George Washington Williams is seeing and that Joseph Conrad is seeing, right? Just terrible, terrible forced labor, okay? Flip over to page 312. This is chock full of a lot of interesting things, so try to speed along. Now, back, you read where it says the courts of your Majesty's government.
The courts of your Majesty's government are abortive, unjust, partial, and delinquent. The laws printed and circulated in Europe for the protection of the blacks in the Congo are a dead letter and a fraud.
Okay, so again, saying everything you're saying in terms of the laws you're establishing in the Congo for the protection of the Congolese, right, for the protection of the natives, is all a big sham. Okay, so keep going.
I have heard an officer of the Belgian army pleading the cause of a white man of low degree who had been guilty of beating and stabbing a black man and urging race distinctions and prejudices as good as and sufficient reasons why his client should be adjudged innocent.
All right, very good. Mr. Vinay, read where it says your Majesty's government.
Your Majesty's government is excessively cruel to its prisoners, condemning them for the slightest offenses to the chain gang, the like of which cannot be seen in any other government in the civilized or uncivilized world. Often these ox chains eat into the necks of the prisoners and produce sores about which the flies circle, aggravating the running wound. These poor creatures are frequently beaten with a dried piece of hippopotamus skin called a chicote, and it's usually the blood flows at every stroke when well laid on. But the cruelties visited upon soldiers and workmen are not to be compared with the suffering of the poor natives who, upon the slightest pretext, are thrust into the wretched prisons here in the upper river.
Read one more paragraph.
Women are imported into your Majesty's government for immoral purposes. The state then hires these women out to the highest bidder, the officers having first choice, and then men.
Okay, you see, so there's brutal treatment of those who are effectively enslaved, the chain gangs, the beating with the rawhide whip and things like that. What about the women? Did you catch that? Yeah, they're basically sold into sex slavery, if you will, right? So the local women are being forced into what we effectively call sex slavery, if you will. One last part. I know this is a depressing topic, but it's interesting too. I'll just read it at the bottom of the page. Your Majesty's government has violated the General Act of the Conference of Berlin by firing upon native canoes, by confiscating the property of natives, by intimidating native traders and preventing them from trading with white trading companies, by quartering troops in native villages when there is no war, by permitting the natives to carry on the slave trade, and by engaging the wholesale and retail slave trade itself. So, again, when it comes to this whole thing with the Berlin Conference and the development of colonial rule in Africa, it's presented, as is often the case, the positive things that are being done, right? Promote humanitarian efforts in the slave trade, to help the local population, to bring development, civilization. But just from these handful of documents, probably you guys can easily discern that what's really going on in the African colonies is what, Bordelon? What's really going on? I mean, why are they there? Is it for humanitarian purposes? It's for exploitation of labor, resources, you name it. And here's the thing, and if you read this book, and if you read what the editors say, George Washington Williams dies shortly after this letter is sent. What happens in the Congo after, later on, in the late 1890s and early 1900s? How do conditions change? They get better? They get worse. They worsen. Why? What is the fundamental reason that in the Belgian Congo, all these conditions just described get even worse about 10 years later?
Demand for rubber increases?
Demand for rubber. Okay? Just so happens, in the 1890s is when new technology is developed of using rubber in transportation. Right? I mean, this is something that's pretty recent, right? If you think about it, okay? You can't take it for granted. You're riding a bicycle. This is fun, okay? Imagine you had tires without air in them, okay? When I was just a poor boy in North Dakota, I had that. I know it sounds weird, but I had like those little bicycles. My brothers had like regular bikes, but I had like a kid's bike that had like the hard plastic tires, okay? And so we would drive, my brothers and I sometimes ride our bikes to the pool in the neighboring town like 4 miles away. And I was like 6 or 7. I was like 5 or 6. Okay. And so my brothers were very nice. Those my 2 older brothers, they would ride ahead on their bikes with rubber tires, right? Which is the norm. And so they'd wait for me. They'd stop, and then like 10 minutes later, I'd come like pedaling up, right, on my little bike that should not be going 4 miles down the road. I mean, like little wheels like this made out of hard plastic. Okay. So again, we know what rubber can do for you compared to like hard plastic tires or like wood tires, whatever, wood wheels. Okay. So in the 1890s is when this use of air pressure rubber tires is developed. And later it'll be used in the automobile industry. At first it's used in bicycles and things like that. But think about it, it's revolutionary. And you need raw rubber, right? Which comes basically in the form of a sap from rubber trees, okay? And what's interesting is, you'll see people start, it's hard. It takes rubber trees a long time to grow, okay? So it's not like you can easily plant them and like start harvesting rubber from them, a few weeks or a few months later. It takes years, okay? Now, in different parts of Africa, like the Congo, rubber trees kind of grow naturally. Now, to extract rubber, you basically, it's like you get like maple syrup, like you tap it, okay? And the rubber flows out, okay? The raw rubber flows out, and you collect it like in buckets, okay? Now, the thing is, if you, a sophisticated piece of technology. All right. So what you want to do is you want to just take some of the rubber off, let it kind of regenerate, because if you take out all the rubber, the tree will die, okay? Or it will become sort of defunct for a long time before it can recover, years before you get rubber out of it again, or it just dies altogether if you go too far with it. Again, think about it. If you're trying to extract this resource and you're not really thinking about ecology, what are you going to do? These people who are setting up this colonial economic exploitation of rubber, yeah, they're sending people out and they're tapping these trees and they're just leaving them dry, if you will. And so the more you do this, then the deeper you have to go, into, let's say, the Congo to get to the raw source of rubber. Okay. Now, who do you think is doing the labor? The natives, right? And by the way, what was going on in the Congo, what the Belgians would do, they go to these villages and they round up like women and children, and they basically put them in chains, and they'd hold them and say, listen, we have your wife and your children, like the local man. If you want to ever see them again, right, you need to go out to the forest and you need to collect X amount of rubber and bring it back here. And so you basically hold them for ransom, if you will, hold them hostage. And oftentimes if the man failed to bring it back or failed to bring it back in time, they would do all sorts of dastardly, terrible things to the family, sometimes killing them. So it's really, really brutal. But this is how you use forced labor for people to go out into the forest to get rubber, okay? It's a rubber. It's like this rubber craze, and it causes all sorts of terrible violence against the natives of the Congo and other parts of Africa in the late 1890s and early 1900s. And again, slavery was outlawed pretty much everywhere by 1880. If you went to the Congo and other parts of Africa in the early 1900s, you'd see Africans tied up with chains and ropes, brutalized in the way that George Washington Williams describes, and for punishment having hands and feet cut off, all sorts of just ghastly things going on. So again, when we think about what this International Association of the Congo claimed they were doing compared to what they ultimately would do, it's just shocking, right? Shocking. Now, the Congo is kind of the grossest example of how bad colonial rule in Africa could be, but that is not to say that it wasn't quite bad everywhere else. This is just kind of like the grossest example of it. But pretty much all over Africa, you see similar sort of phenomena. Whether it's in South Africa with using forced African labor in the diamond mines, you name it. It's just, when it comes to extracting resources and wealth, and kind of money and economic exploitation is the bottom line, you see all sorts of problematics developing related to how one would then engage with the local population of all of these lands, who basically not only see their lands taken, but then the people and the resources exploited.
Are we starting to see like similar things going on in Africa again?
Yeah. No, you do see it. It's, I mean, you could say that in a lot of places, because, by the way, what we're talking about here in South Africa, or in Africa, most of these countries that are colonized, late 19th century, they don't gain their independence. Like Ghana doesn't gain its independence until 1960. They're one of the first, right? Nigeria and Kenya are like late 60s, early 70s. Angola, Mozambique are late 1970s, okay? And so we're talking about only very recently do a lot of these countries gain their independence from colonial rules after World War II, all of them. And if you want to use another example, South Africa, which originally inhabited, native populations, Dutch settlers, eventually Dutch settlers were displaced by British settlers, and eventually after World War II, a very conservative racist government comes into power in 1949. It's an Afrikaner party, meaning Dutch South African. I don't know if you know the story, right? So in 1949, after World War II, the Afrikaners come into power, and again, they are historically sort of more racist than the British are as it relates to race relations with the native population. And what was the policy that they put on the books as part of their political platform in 1949? What is it? Apartheid, okay, if you've heard of it, apartheid. This is 1949, so this is quite recent. This policy of strict segregation of the races in South Africa, right? So again, if you went to Cape Town, you might not, if you went into Cape Town proper, the only black people you would see, even though the majority of the population is black, the only black people you'd see would be there working like in the restaurants as maids in like the service industry. And at night, all the black people who worked in Cape Town had to go out to the townships. So kind of like in the United States where Native Americans live on reservations, in South Africa, this is the phenomenon with apartheid where if you are a black South African, you lived in segregated housing in the townships, completely separated and segregated from the white population. Beaches were segregated. If you went to the beach, you'd see a sign that say, whites only beach, right? And you go to another beach, colors only beach. And that would include like black Africans, Indian, members of the Indian population, mixed population, things like that. Now, what makes this even more interesting is this policy of apartheid. Do you know when it ends? It starts in 1949. It's on the books officially all the way until Nelson Mandela is elected president in what year? It's a little later than that, but it's in your lifetime, most of your lifetime. 1994. Apartheid's on the books in South Africa until 1994. Like in your lifetime, if you were born in 94, apartheid was the policy. So again, if you went to the beach in South Africa, whites only beach, blacks only beach. Okay, townships, segregation, and again, in the United States, we have a history of segregation too, ending in the 60s and the 70s. But think about this, right? In the United States, you still go to, all over the United States, you still see segregation de facto, right? It's not part of the law, but it's still reality, right? Where towns, it's divided between whites and blacks, right? Kind of a historical legacy of that. Same thing in South Africa today, right? You still see great segregation between the races, even though apartheid officially ended 21 years ago now. You still see kind of the legacy of this. Of course, what Mandela wanted to create was what he called his rainbow nation, right? I mean, this is why the flag looks the way it does. It was the idea like white, black, and Asian, we all need to sort of live together and get along and work together as a country. And Mandela did do a lot to benefit race relations in South Africa, but there's still that segregation. There's that historical sort of tension as a result of it. So I can tell you more about it. We're running out of time. We'll come back and we'll finish up some of the stuff on Monday. We'll start moving towards World War I. Oh my goodness! So I'll send you another set of reading. Hey, you guys did a good job on the reading. Were these readings interesting? All right, good. You guys did great. Dr. Campbell kept on track for most of the time. Y'all try to keep this for you. Have a good one. Have a good weekend. It's Wednesday. It feels like Friday, doesn't it, Brooksmith? Good. I've got most of them I can read, and I take a break for the break, and we're doing the exam, so some people got away from me. Hold tight, I might have it. I mean, I had 3 or 4 of them.
And
I got a paper.
this might be too far into the future, but, the final, is
Spare time is that?
because I have a 9-2 and yours that day. So if not, it's gonna, I mean, people didn't move.
All right, let's think.
So,
Okay, let's think about it. Good that you came to me early. Let's think about it. Figure it out. Okay. Brooke Smith's a planner. A real planner. Right, Grant? Yes, sir. All right.
Wait, can I turn my paper Friday?
Friday, I think I told you on Friday with me. No, you weren't here on Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Matthew Laird, not the rest of the class. You get special privilege. You can turn it Friday. Okay? The rest of them have to turn it in today. If they haven't turned it in out this late, okay? So. Yo, she's ready to get it up.
I'm
Night,
not
Sarah?
gonna be here, so. I'm
So,
gonna do today, so.
Were you and Wolf comparing notes on your grades? Are you like in competition with Mason?
We said we're,
No, I know. But your grades are very close. So I'm like, oh, one's gonna be happy, one's gonna be.
Oh, yeah, we always like fight because he always makes like one.
Well, that's what I was wondering. That's what I was wondering.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that happened.
All right.